Series 2, Corfu Meditations. We've been dealing with certain pivotal figures in the history of religion and in the development of our own faith. Those, of course, are Melchizedek, the Magi, and then in the 20th century, Ramun Panikar. And I offer these particular individuals because they're open doors to the great wisdoms of other religions. And from the gospel itself, which tells us there's so much more than what is contained in the gospels that we find in the New Testament. And so that's what we're exploring in these talks and in our lives as Christians and people of religion, open to the action of the Spirit wherever that happens in the world. There's a certain element. I'm going to draw together a number of elements here and introduce a new one today with this painting that I painted in 1973. And it was the first of a series after I graduated from college that dealt with theological issues. I was one of the few students in the art department that in college that was interested in God. And certainly one of the few that wanted to talk about it. And it's one of the reasons that I went to the monastery subsequently and then the seminary. But the elements of this painting are large amorphic colors and space and shapes counterpointed against these hard-edged geometric embellishments that for me, after many years of meditating upon this series of paintings, of which there are more than 100 members, represented a relationship between the great amorphic absolute and the particular elements of our lives that suffer the restrictions of a limited mortality, as opposed to the great eternal nature from which we come. And how that is reflected in our religions. I'll give examples now because it's important to realize that we share so much with not only with other religions, but in the very construct of the human nature. We all are dealing with the same body and mind in the terrestrial environment. And we have to be open to where the Spirit has flowed, like the Tao, flows freely wherever it will. When I went to Tibet and India to study Buddhism, Tantric Buddhism, the last great flowering of Buddhism in India before it was destroyed there, and when it had already taken root in Tibet and was preserved there until this century. You deal with an art form called the mandala. And the mandala, the sacred circle, has within it the divine palace. And within the divine palace is the Holy One, the Lord of the mandala. And the structure of the mandala derives from patterns not only from India and Tibet and Nepal, but from places west of there in Persia and Mesopotamia. And therefore, about the same time, it influenced the patterns of temples and sanctuaries in all of the Middle East, in Israel itself, and therefore it influenced the structure of Christian architecture and the thoughts surrounding and incorporated in Christian architecture with the sanctuary and the Holy of the Holies in the middle of the temple construct, through which one went sort of on a pilgrimage from outside to the inside world of the Spirit. There are a number of elements that I want to focus on in this regard, and that draws together not only early Stone Age thinking and discoveries and insights, but that still breathe into our own age with the life-giving presence of the Spirit. First among those is just this understanding, the basic understanding, that there's more than one world. There's more than just ourselves. There's more than just the mechanics of this world, which science is so good at discovering the workings of and how they function, how this world functions, etc. But religion has been at this same question for a much longer time from a different perspective, in this insight about there being two worlds, a world of the Spirit and a world of physical life that we all share. And then another element within the same complex of themes and thoughts that I am trying to display for you is the shift of consciousness. If one follows the training and the development of a Tibetan yogi, and for which the mandala is created to help the yogi travel the inner path, there might be thousands of symbols within that mandalic structure that the yogi is totally familiar with and engages as he engages various states of consciousness to accomplish the purpose of his meditations, his or her meditations. There's many famous yoginis as well as yogis. And then within the same early developments is the ideas of ritual, organized combinations of symbols and gestures and symbolic actions. And like say at the beginning of the Mass, you move from outside the church with the priest and his entourage, and you enter the church into the inner sanctuary from the outside normal world into the Holy of Holies. And we're supposed to follow that in our hearts, awakening the mood of the holy within us. And most people experience this as at least the slight shift of peace in one's mind and heart that they carry away from the celebration of the Mass or the liturgy of the Divine Office, or so many other liturgies, or you find similar things in Buddhism and among shamanistic rituals. And there are so many sensitivities and understandings. For instance, the priest impersonates Christ. The priest becomes the Christ of the altar, in the Pueblo of Zuni in New Mexico, somewhere around November, December, they have a celebration of a big ritual of called the Shalako, and people train for years to participate in the Shalako and don these masks and these costumes, which represent various kachinas that are the various deities and that symbolize different archetypal aspects of our experience and the experience of the divine, and that sort of arena in which we mesh the two worlds come together. And then at the end of this long celebration, these long rituals that go on for days and for which preparation has been months or years sometimes, the shalico is taken out outside the village in some private place and sacrificed for the sake of the people. And our Lord is sacrificed for the sake of the world. And so you have this notion of sacrifice. To make sacred. It doesn't have to be killing somebody. It doesn't have to be sacrificing somebody else for your benefit, or it's God sacrificing himself for his own creation. And even the making of creation, God had to sacrifice himself to make the world, because there was nothing else but himself or herself to accomplish this. And so you have these ideas of the two worlds, the shift of consciousness, which is incredibly varied, a whole rainbow of possibilities within that, other positive possibilities. That aspect of our being atrophies now, because we don't need these things to produce and consume. However, in a world that was dedicated to something more fundamental than economics, the human person and the potential of the human person is much more important. So first you have the sense of another world, you have the shift of consciousness, you have the complex understanding of how symbols evoke moods and attitudes within us. And you have this notion of impersonation. So we use figures like Melchizedek and the Magi to open the doors, because our religion seems to be open to these people who were not Christian, not Jewish, don't even know what their religions were, but acknowledge a wisdom tradition of great variety and enormous import for the human identity. I would say that these things carry us through the liturgy of the word that we were exploring on Corfu in earlier talks that I tried to describe for you. There is so much more, and it's a world open to the seeking heart. In the name of the